Let's be honest, the NHL has never loved small players. In fact, most of them never even got a real chance. For decades, scouts repeated the same phrase every single year: he's talented, but he's too small to survive in this league. And for the longest time, everyone believed it. Coaches believed it, general managers believed it, even players coming up in junior believed it. If you weren't 6 feet 2 inches and built like a machine, you simply didn't fit the NHL mold. The result? Hundreds of skilled prospects were pushed aside before they even played a single professional game. Size was the gatekeeper, strength was the standard, and if your body didn't fit the prototype, it didn't matter how good your hands, vision, or hockey IQ were. You were labeled a high-risk player. But something is changing in front of our eyes. A new generation of players is slowly tearing down that old belief. They're smaller, they're faster, they play with edge and creativity, and they're forcing the entire hockey world to ask a question nobody thought we'd ever have to ask. Is there really such a thing as too small for today's NHL? And to answer that, you only need to look at one name: Lane Hutson, a rookie who wasn't supposed to be here, a player every scout said was too small, and yet he just won Rookie of the Year. But to really understand how we got here, we need to look back at how the NHL used to treat guys like him. There was a time when being under 6 feet basically meant you'd never make it past the AHL. The NHL of the late 90s and early 2000s was built around brute strength and intimidation. You had defensemen like Scott Stevens patrolling the blue line. You had Zdeno Chara crushing anything that moved. You had enforcers and checking specialists on every single roster. The message was clear: if you were small, you were a target. Even players with elite talent were ignored because they didn't fit the physical mold. Martin St. Louis, a future Hall of Famer and Stanley Cup champion, was never even drafted. He spent years trying to prove he simply belonged in the league, and the craziest part is, he's not an exception. He's proof that too small wasn't just a scouting term, it was a mentality. Things started to change after the 2005 lockout. The NHL introduced a series of rule changes designed to open up the game. No more hooking and holding, less obstruction, tighter officiating. Suddenly, speed mattered more than brute force. Players like Patrick Kane, Johnny Gaudreau, and Cam Atkinson, guys who would have been laughed out of training camp 10 years earlier, became legitimate game breakers. Teams didn't change overnight, they were cautious. But slowly, something became obvious: skill wins games. And if that skill comes in a smaller package, so be it. Jack Hughes might be the best modern example of why too small doesn't mean not good enough. When he was drafted first overall, people were obsessed with his size: 5 feet 10 inches, 170 pounds. He'll get destroyed in the NHL. He won't last an entire season. His rookie year wasn't great, and critics felt validated, but then he adapted. He got smarter. He learned how to manipulate space, how to change speed, how to drag defenders out of position. He didn't grow into a 6'1" power forward. He grew into a smarter player. Fast forward to today, and he's easily one of the top 5 most dynamic players in the world, not because he overcame his size, but because he used it to his advantage. He bends the game to his style: east-west movement, button hooks, misdirection. He controls time and space with IQ and touch. Which brings us to Lane Hutson, the player almost every NHL team considered too risky. Drafted 62nd overall, barely 5 feet 9 inches. The scouting reports were brutal: elite skill, but probably too small to handle NHL competition. Except none of that happened. He dominated the USNTDP, he dominated college. He stepped into the NHL and wasted no time proving everyone wrong. Instead of getting overwhelmed, he took control. His edge work looks like something straight out of a video game. He deceives defenders with the blade of his stick. He gives them just enough room to bite before slipping a pass through a seam nobody else even saw. Scouts said he'd never survive. Now he's not just surviving, he's winning the Calder Trophy, and the way he plays isn't just good for a small player, it's elite for any player. So how do players like Lane Hutson, Jack Hughes, or Cole Caulfield actually thrive in a league where most players still outweigh them by 30 pounds? It's not magic, it's adaptation. Modern NHL rules create more open ice. Defenders can't hook, clutch, or grab the way they used to. That means small players aren't forced into physical battles as often. They can pick their lanes and dictate the tempo. They use tight turns and quick cuts to escape pressure instead of trying to muscle their way through it. Hutson, for example, almost never skates into contact. Instead, he invites pressure and then shifts direction half a second before the hit comes. His edge work lets him turn danger into an opportunity. His pass is already gone before defenders can even touch him. Being small isn't a weakness in today's game. It's a different set of tools, and those tools can be lethal when used properly. But there's one thing all these too small players have in common, and it's not speed or skill, it's compete level. Cole Caulfield isn't just a sniper, he's relentless off the puck. Jonathan Marchessault didn't win a Conn Smythe because he was flashy. He won it because he attacked at the exact right moments and never stopped moving his feet. Lane Hutson plays the game the same way. He knows he'll lose most 50-50 battles if he just stands there, so he doesn't. He times his pressure, anticipates loose pucks, jumps into open space 1 second before anyone else. That's the real secret of undersized players in 2025. They don't try to win every battle, they only fight the ones they can actually win, and when they do, they strike with precision. At this point, it's tempting to simply say, size doesn't matter anymore. In many ways, that's true. The modern NHL is faster, more skilled, and more open than ever. But the reality is a little more complicated. Once the playoffs begin, the ice shrinks. Every inch becomes contested. Shifts get shorter, forechecks get heavier. And that's where old school hockey fans still argue that smaller players eventually break. They point to long, grinding playoff series and say, that's where big bodies win. And they're not completely wrong. Bigger players still have natural advantages along the boards and in net front battles. When you watch a 7-game series between teams like Tampa and Boston, you can literally see how much harder it is for undersized players to find space. But here's the part they don't mention. The best small players don't try to fight for that space, they create it. Braden Point is listed at barely 5'10". Ask anyone in Tampa's locker room, and they'll tell you he's one of the most dangerous playoff performers in the league. Why? Because he doesn't engage in every battle. He picks his moments, forces defenders to chase him, then strikes when they're off balance. Quinn Hughes does the same thing on the back end. He doesn't need to overpower anyone. He just manipulates pressure with footwork and patience until a passing lane opens up. And by the time it does, it's too late to close it. This is what Lane Hutson is already starting to master as a rookie. When space disappears, he doesn't rush plays or force the puck into traffic. He waits, and then makes a move at the one moment the defender turns his feet the wrong way. That's what small players need to do in 2025. They don't win by fighting harder, they win by thinking faster. So yes, size still matters, but more than anything, it matters how you play with the body you have. For years, the NHL's answer was simple. Yes, if you were 5 feet 9 inches and 160 pounds, you were a risk teams didn't want to take, especially in the playoffs. Size was considered a requirement, the foundation of every Stanley Cup roster. Players like Martin St. Louis or Theo Fleury weren't celebrated. They were treated like rare exceptions who beat the odds. Today, that idea is starting to crumble. Jack Hughes isn't just surviving, he's dominating. Cole Caulfield isn't an undersized winger who gets by. He's one of the league's most dangerous finishers at 5 feet 7 inches. Quinn Hughes controls entire games from the blue line and still doesn't win battles with strength. He wins them with angles and timing. And now, Lane Hutson has entered the conversation with a rookie season that forced everyone to stop and reconsider what's possible. He didn't just play pretty good for a small guy. He played like a future franchise cornerstone. Maybe 10 years ago, the answer to this question was obvious. But after watching players like Marchessault lift the Conn Smythe, Point dominate the playoffs, and Hutson step into the league and take over games with nothing but brains, edges, and courage. Maybe the real question isn't whether there's such a thing as too small, but whether the NHL is finally ready to admit that the game has already left that myth behind.